3:41 a.m. Park City, Utah. A property manager named Dale Whitford was doing his overnight rounds on a ridge road above the Wasatch foothills, checking on 7 winterized vacation properties his management company held in inventory. He drove this route every night, had driven it for 11 years. The contract didn't require it. It specified daytime inspections only. But Whitford had learned long ago that properties failed in the dark. Pipes burst at night. Vandals moved at night. Carbon monoxide detectors went off at 2 in the morning. He'd found a burst main at 1:30 that saved a property owner $60,000 in damage. He'd interrupted 2 break-ins, both after midnight. He drove the road because experience had taught him to. 6 of the properties were dark, locked, sealed against a December cold front. He checked each one the same way, slow pass in the truck, window down, eyes on the roofline and driveway. All 6 were exactly as they should be. The 7th was different. Smoke. A thin gray column rising from the stone chimney of a log cabin listed as vacant since late October. The property was winterized November 4th. All utilities disconnected. Firewood removed. The owner, a Utah woman with a pending court matter, hadn't renewed the rental agreement. Whitford pulled his truck to the shoulder. He sat there for a moment, engine running. Looked at the smoke. Looked at the Subaru Outback in the driveway, buried under 4 inches of overnight snow. No tire tracks leading in. No footprints on the front walk. No lights visible through the curtained windows. He lowered his window further, listening. No sound from the cabin. Nothing in the trees. Just whined through pine branches and the faint smell of wood smoke. He had smelled thousands of fires. This one had been burning for hours, thick, settled smoke from hardwood that had been stacked and dried. Someone had built this fire before midnight. The Subaru hadn't moved. The snow on the hood was undisturbed, level, the same depth as snow on the driveway stones. That vehicle had been sitting there since before the snowfall started, which weather records would confirm began at approximately 7:40 p.m. the previous evening. He didn't approach. 11 years on this road had taught him not to investigate alone. He drove back down to the paved road, and at 3:41 a.m. on December 9th, 2025, he called the Summit County non-emergency line and reported what he had seen: a winterized cabin, a vehicle with snow accumulation consistent with at least 8 hours of stillness, and a chimney producing active smoke. That call would ultimately reach the United States Marshals Service, Salt Lake City Fugitive Task Force, within 90 minutes. Before that morning, no federal agent had any reason to search the ridge road above Pine Brook. The task force had been working the case for 11 days, triangulating cell tower pings, running vehicle lookups on 17 registered addresses, interviewing bail bondsmen, and reviewing surveillance footage from 3 border crossings. They had generated 42 pages of investigative notes and found no trail. The woman they were looking for had simply disappeared into the winter. But she had made a fire. In the 90 minutes between Whitford's call and the first task force notification, the call moved through 3 separate hands. The Summit County non-emergency dispatcher who took Whitford's report at 3:41 logged it as a suspicious property concern, possible trespasser, or unauthorized occupant at a managed vacation property. The dispatcher routed it to a county sheriff's deputy working the overnight shift. That deputy ran the property address through the county assessor's system, identified the registered owner, and ran the owner's name through the National Crime Information Center as procedural routine. She had run hundreds of such queries in her 4 years on overnight shifts. Most returned nothing. Some returned minor civil matters. Occasionally, one returned a warrant. The NINSIC returned a hit in under 4 seconds. The registered property owner had an active federal warrant, a bail violation out of the District of Utah, issued November 30th. The deputy escalated immediately to her shift supervisor, who made the call to the US Marshals service duty agent at 4:11 a.m. The duty agent on call that night was Deputy Marshal Terrence Blythe, 3 years on the Salt Lake City Task Force, familiar with the Aldrin file from the original warrant briefing 2 weeks earlier. He pulled the address from the warrant documentation, cross-referenced it with the property manager's report, and confirmed what the county deputy had already suspected. The address Whitford had flagged was Aldrin's disclosed vacation property from her bail application. The Subaru Outback was registered in Aldrin's name. 3 separate data points, the warrant, the property disclosure, the vehicle registration, all pointed to the same place. Blythe made 2 calls in rapid sequence. One to Senior Deputy Marshal Renata Okafor, the case lead. One to the task force supervisor to request a tactical response team. He documented the time of each call in the operational log, 4:22 a.m. Both calls connected within 30 seconds. The case began not in a mountain cabin, but in a Summit County courtroom, and it began the way most fraud cases begin, with paperwork that almost added up. In late September of 2025, a Utah woman named by this reconstruction as Claire Aldrin was scheduled to appear for a preliminary hearing on a federal indictment that charged her with wire fraud, forgery of financial instruments, and money laundering. The underlying scheme, as described in sealed court documents reviewed for this account, involved forged Zelle payment confirmations, sent to at least 3 individuals as proof of financial transfers that never occurred. The forgery was technically sophisticated. Aldrin had obtained legitimate bank statement templates through social engineering, and what investigators believed to be at least one complicit financial services employee. The Zelle confirmation screenshots she produced replicated the exact formatting, font sizes, and transaction reference numbers used by actual Zelle transfers. She altered dollar amounts and timestamps using consumer-grade image editing software. The resulting documents were indistinguishable from genuine transaction confirmations. She had refined the process over multiple iterations. The earliest versions were crude. The most recent were nearly perfect. The victims, identified by initials only in the documents, had each entered into a financial arrangement with Aldrin based on what they believed were completed wire transfers. The transfers were fabrications. The documentation was fabricated. The total value of the fraudulent instruments exceeded $240,000. Aldrin had been released on a $50,000 bail bond in August of 2025, with standard conditions, weekly check-ins with a pretrial services officer, surrender of passport, and no travel outside the state of Utah. She appeared for every check-in through October. Compliant. Cooperative. Punctual. On November 28th, she missed a scheduled check-in. The supervising officer flagged it. A phone call to her listed number went unanswered. A courtesy visit to her Park City residence by a county officer the following day found the house locked, mail accumulating, and no signs of recent occupancy. On November 30th, a federal arrest warrant was issued for bail violation. The warrant was assigned to the United States Marshals Service Salt Lake City Task Force that afternoon. Senior Deputy Marshal Renata Okafor led the fugitive investigation. She was 7 years into the task force and had worked 43 fugitive apprehensions. She described the early days of the Aldrin case as follows. The subject had no criminal history before this indictment, no known associates with criminal records, no family contacts outside of Utah, and approximately $60,000 in liquid assets, accessible at the time of her disappearance. She had not used her credit card since November 27th. Her cell phone was last active on November 26th. The task force ran a standard fugitive protocol. Okafor assigned 2 investigators to canvass Aldrin's known associates, former colleagues, neighbors, a sister in Provo who said she hadn't spoken to Aldrin in 4 months. The financial forensics team worked backward through Aldrin's bank records, looking for cash withdrawals that might indicate a planned disappearance. They found a pattern. Between November 5th and November 24th, Aldrin had made 7 ATM withdrawals, totaling $9,400. The amounts were varied, $400 here, $800 there, a single withdrawal of $1,500. The pattern suggested someone systematically converting account balances to untraceable cash. She had been building a reserve. By early November, she had known she was going to run. She had planned this before she missed a single check-in. 1 clean-cut disappearance. 11 days of nothing. Whitford's smoke call changed everything. When the Summit County dispatcher relayed the non-emergency call at 3:41 a.m., the duty agent at the task force office pulled Aldrin's registered properties and cross-referenced them with her bail documents. Aldrin had disclosed 3 addresses at the time of her bail application: her primary Park City residence, a storage unit in Heber City, and a vacation property in the Pinebrook area of Summit County, listed as rented to a property management company for seasonal use. That cabin. The one with the smoke. The warrant was already in hand. Deputy Marshal Okafor was reached at 4:22 a.m. She authorized a tactical response and requested support from the Summit County Sheriff's Office. By 5:50 a.m., a 3-vehicle convoy was on the I-80 on-ramp heading east toward the Wasatch foothills. Total personnel approaching the Ridge Road: 3 deputy marshals, 2 sheriff's deputies, and a K-9 handler named Deputy Alan Sears, with a Belgian Malinois named Rook. Whitford met them at the base of the Ridge Road at 6:12 a.m. He was still in his property management truck, a white F-150 with the company logo on the doors, engine running against the cold. He had not gone home. He said later he had not even considered it. He had sat at the junction of the Ridge Road and the paved route for 2 hours and 20 minutes, engine idling, watching the smoke continue to rise until the fire banked low enough that the smoke became barely visible in the pre-dawn dark. He confirmed the smoke had continued throughout the early morning. He confirmed the Subaru had not moved. He handed Okafor a full property layout, floor plan, room count, the access road, the location of the root cellar that predated the cabin's current construction. He had retrieved it from his company's digital property file on his phone while waiting for the convoy. He had driven to an all-night copy shop in Park City and printed a hard copy. That was beyond his job description. No one had asked him to do it. He did it because he had managed that property for 3 seasons and knew its layout the way he knew all his properties. He did it because he could see, standing there in the dark, that whatever was happening up in that cabin was more serious than a trespasser. That root cellar. It was in the file, listed in the property records as a below-grade storage space, approximately 11 by 13 feet, accessible through a door in the pantry. Sealed for winter. Not part of standard seasonal inspection. Okafor read the floor plan once, folded it, and put it in her jacket pocket. She logged the cellar location before they moved on the property. She did not yet know what it contained. She had reason to believe Aldrin was inside the cabin. She had no reason to expect anything beyond a bail fugitive hiding in a vacation property. She was wrong about the scope. Right about the cabin. At 6:22 a.m., with full darkness still holding, and the temperature at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, Okafor called a tactical briefing beside the lead vehicle. She covered the floor plan from memory, pointing out the cabin's two entry points, front door and rear deck door, the master bedroom in the back right corner, the kitchen along the east wall, and the pantry with its below-grade storage access. She assigned observation fields to each deputy, one on the rear deck approach, one on the east window line, one positioned to cover the driveway in case the subject attempted to reach the Subaru. She designated Deputy Circe and Rook as the interior search team for secondary spaces once the primary subject was located and secured. She told the team to hold position until first light. At 6:22 a.m. in December, in Summit County, Utah, first light was still nearly 90 minutes away. They held. The convoy sat cold and dark on the shoulder of the ridge road. The deputies took turns stepping out to keep their legs from stiffening in the sub-zero wind. Rook sat in the back of the K9 unit, head up, watching the ridge through the vehicle's rear window. Circes noted later that the dog had been agitated during the drive up I-80, not a trained alert, just the animal tension that experienced K9 handlers recognize as a dog reading the atmosphere. He gave Rook 2 minutes of movement and watched the dog work the ground air deliberately, nose low, in arcs. Nothing actionable. Just a working animal orienting itself in a new environment in the cold. The convoy held position 500 meters down the ridge road until full light. First movement at 7:48 a.m. They approached the driveway in single file, headlights off. The Subaru was still buried. The mailbox was stuffed with realtor flyers, some pushed in by a mail carrier who hadn't noticed the cabin's status. The chimney was now cold. The fire had burned down during the night. A perimeter was established around the structure at 8:02 a.m. Okafor called the property from the tree line, using the number registered to Aldrin's bail file. No answer. Called again. No answer. A deputy in position behind the east tree line reported a brief movement behind one of the curtained windows between the first and second calls, a shadow crossing the light. Not definitive. Enough. At 8:10 a.m., the decision was made to breach. Think for a moment about what the task force did not know as they stacked at the front door that morning. They were executing a bail violation warrant. Standard operation. 1 fugitive, 1 cabin, 6 personnel. The operation log filed before entry anticipated a single subject detention, a property search for travel documents and financial records, and a transport to the Summit County Detention Facility. None of that anticipated what Rook found. At 8:12 a.m., 40 seconds after the front door came open, the K9 hit hard on the pantry wall. Not the pantry door. Not the storage shelves. The wall itself. Rook sat, turned, made direct eye contact with Deputy Circe, and refused to move. In K9 operational protocol, that specific sequence, a hit on a structural surface followed by a sit and sustained alert, indicates concealment behind the surface. Circe radioed Okafor immediately. She was already moving through the main room. She reached the pantry in under 20 seconds. The pantry wall was trimmed to look like reclaimed barn wood. A decorative panel, floor to ceiling, running the full back wall of the pantry space. It was a convincing installation. The wood was weathered, fitted with antique hardware, consistent with the cabin's aesthetic. Nothing about it looked like a door. But Rook wasn't an aesthetic critic. Deputy Sears noted in his K9 unit report that Rook's alert had been unambiguous from the first approach. No hesitation, no secondary check. The dog had moved directly to the panel, dropped into alert position without being prompted, and held. In Sears's 7 years working K9 operations, he had seen dogs hold an alert on a structural surface fewer than a dozen times. It was one of the rarest alerts in his experience, and one of the most reliable. A dog alerting on open space or a container is reacting to a scent trail. A dog alerting on a wall is reacting to something behind it. 8:27 a.m. A deputy marshal applied a sledgehammer to the lower left corner of the panel. 3 strikes. The 4th broke the latch. The panel swung outward on a recessed hinge. Behind it, a wooden staircase descending 6 steps into a sealed below-grade space. 11 by 13 feet, exactly as the property records described. Temperature approximately 52 degrees Fahrenheit. A single work light powered by a portable battery pack, still running. 3 folding cots. An iron pipe bolted horizontally to the back wall at waist height. 3 young women. The women's ages were recorded on intake documents as 24, 25, and 27. All 3 were United States residents. All 3 had been reported missing by family members over the preceding 3.5 months. 1 in Nevada, 1 in Colorado, 1 in Utah. Each had come into Aldrin's circle through a different point of contact, but through the same mechanism. What investigators reconstructed in the weeks following the cabin discovery, from interviews with family members and from ledger entries, was this. Aldrin identified financially anxious individuals through an informal social network that included 2 online investing groups and a Park City social circle. She presented herself as a private wealth manager with exclusive access to short-cycle real estate investment instruments, 12-week returns in the range of 18 to 22%. She provided references, all of whom turned out to be fictional or unreachable. She provided documentation, signed investment agreements, account statements from what appeared to be a licensed brokerage, and, when the arrangement was finalized, Zelle confirmation screenshots showing the initial investment funds being placed into the instrument account. The Zelle confirmations were the linchpin. They looked real. They matched. The dollar amounts were right. The reference numbers were consistent with actual Zelle formatting. No one who received them questioned them in the first few days. By the time questions began, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, when the projected return date had passed and the account was unreachable, Aldrin had already built leverage. The signed investment agreements contained clauses about confidentiality obligations and financial penalties for early withdrawal. The victims, already down the money they had put in, were advised by Aldrin that making noise would trigger those penalties and potentially invalidate any recovery. She told them the instrument was in a regulatory review period. She told them to be patient. She called each of them personally, at intervals, maintaining the fiction of an active manager. She was methodical about contact. The ledger tracked it, dates, call durations, the substance of what was said. And then the arrangements changed. The 24-year-old from Nevada had entered the arrangement in late August of 2025 through one of the online investing groups. Her investment was $41,000, savings accumulated over 3 years of nursing work. She reported herself missing to her family in Reno on September 9th, after failing to respond to calls for 4 days. Her family initially assumed she was traveling. She had mentioned a Park City trip to a friend the week before she disappeared. The missing persons report, filed with the Reno Metropolitan Police Department, was classified as a voluntary missing adult. Her case had not been flagged for federal review by the time of the December 9th discovery. The 25-year-old from Colorado had entered the arrangement in July through a mutual contact in the Park City social network. Her investment was $62,000. Her family in Denver filed a missing persons report on September 22nd. She had last been seen at a Park City coffee shop on September 18th. Her family told investigators she had seemed distracted in their last phone call, 3 days before she disappeared. She had mentioned a meeting she was nervous about. She had not told them where or with whom. Her family spent 11 weeks working with Denver police and a private investigator who traced her as far as the Park City coffee shop. The 27-year-old from Utah had entered the arrangement in June, the earliest of the three. Her investment was $55,000. She lived in Salt Lake City. Her disappearance was reported by her roommate on September 2nd, after she failed to return from a weekend trip described only as a meeting in the mountains. Her car had been found parked on a residential street in Park City on September 4th, unlocked, with her phone on the passenger seat. The phone was dead. Her keys were in the center console. She had left her vehicle voluntarily, or had been directed to. Investigators, in retrospect, noted that each disappearance had been initially classified in a category that did not trigger rapid escalation: voluntary missing adult, voluntary missing adult, voluntary missing adult. In each case, Aldrin had apparently prepared a cover story, communicated through the victim, that suggested a deliberate departure, a mention of a trip, a hint of personal stress, just enough to delay the search. By the time the delay expired and the cases began escalating, Aldrin had 11 weeks of distance and a padlocked root cellar door. When the victims couldn't recover their money and began pressing Aldrin, the arrangements changed in ways investigators were still piecing together. What the record shows is this: as of December 9th, all three had been held in the root cellar for 95 days. They had been given bottled water and expired protein bars on a fixed schedule. At various points during captivity, their wrists had been secured to the iron rail on the back wall. The zip ties found on 2 of them at time of entry were consistent with extended restriction. Both women wearing zip ties were ambulatory when deputies reached them. The third was seated on her cot and stood without assistance. All three were transported to Park City Medical Center by 8:50 a.m. All three were receiving IV hydration within 12 minutes of hospital arrival. Deputy Marshal Okafor stayed at the cabin. She had found Aldrin already. The fugitive was located in the cabin's master bedroom, not in the cellar. She had heard the breach and had attempted to barricade the bedroom door with a dresser. The dresser weighed roughly 60 pounds when empty. Aldrin had not fully moved it before the deputies reached the door. The barricade held for approximately 4 seconds. Aldrin was in custody at 8:33 a.m., 6 minutes after the false pantry wall came down. She did not speak at the time of arrest. Okafor noted that Aldrin was fully dressed when taken into custody, including outerwear. Her boots were laced. Her bag was packed and sitting beside the bedroom door, a single duffel containing clothing, a toiletry kit, and $9,200 in mixed bills. The bag suggested she had been preparing to leave and had not yet done so. Whether she had been unable to find an opening, or whether she had heard the convoy approaching in the early morning, and had not had time, the report does not speculate. What the bag established was that she had known, at some point that morning, that departure was necessary. She simply had not made it fast enough. Okafor's radio report, time-stamped 8:57 a.m., was brief. 3 recovered. Ambulatory. Very confident it's her. That transmission was received by the Salt Lake City Field Coordination Desk, where a duty supervisor made 3 simultaneous phone calls: to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Salt Lake City, to the lead case agent on the original fraud indictment, and to the Summit County District Attorney. The case had just expanded from a bail violation pickup into something that would require an entirely different category of federal charges. The fraud indictment was now the smallest part of this. Aldrin was transported to the Summit County Detention Facility at 9:45 a.m. She was booked on the existing bail violation warrant. Her Miranda rights were read in the transport vehicle. She acknowledged them and said nothing further. At the detention facility, she was processed, photographed, and placed in a holding cell pending the assignment of counsel. A federal public defender was appointed by early afternoon. Aldrin met with counsel for 47 minutes. She made no statement to investigators on December 9th, and no statement during the December 11th arraignment, beyond a standard not guilty plea. The lead case agent, Special Agent Marisa Henriksen, arrived at the cabin at 9:15 a.m. She had driven from Salt Lake City that morning, having been called at 8:57. She was on I-80 within 12 minutes of that call. Henriksen had been the primary financial investigator on the original fraud indictment. She had built the charging documents from 14 months of financial analysis. She knew the scheme's documented structure better than anyone else in the federal chain. She arrived at the cabin knowing the names of 3 documented fraud victims and 1 accused. She left the cabin knowing the scope had expanded substantially. In the hour after entry, while Aldrin was being processed and transported, Okafor and 2 deputies conducted a methodical search of the cabin. What they found in the first sweep, the portable battery pack still running, 43 spent water bottles, 2 cardboard boxes of expired protein bars, 1 opened, 1 sealed, a sleeping bag, a notebook with pages torn out, a locked exterior hatch in the root cellar's floor, a secondary egress door, original to the pre-1990 construction, padlocked from the outside. It was in the kitchen that they found the ledger. A hollowed-out cookbook, the cavity cut by hand, the book left spine out on a shelf between 2 others of similar size. Inside, a leather-bound log, approximately 6 by 8 inches. 112 pages, roughly half filled. Handwriting consistent throughout. The ledger was documented in place, photographed, and sealed into evidence bags at 9:31 a.m. Henriksen photographed it herself before the evidence technician bagged it. She noted the title of the cookbook and attached it to her case file. She did not open the ledger at the cabin. Standard protocol requires documentary evidence to be processed at the evidence facility before examination. But she noted its approximate dimensions, its apparent density of content, and the fact that the cavity had been cut with precision, not torn or ripped but carved cleanly. Someone had spent time on this. The concealment was deliberate. She drove back to Salt Lake City with the evidence logs and spent the afternoon in the field office waiting for the processing queue to clear. At 7:14 p.m. on December 9th, the ledger was released for examination under controlled conditions. Henriksen sat down with it at the evidence examination table at 7:22 p.m. She worked through it for the next 4.5 hours, stopping periodically to photograph individual pages and flag entries. What the task force did not learn until the following day was the full shape of what Aldrin had been running. The ledger contained entries that agents cross-referenced against the original fraud indictment and found to be an extension of it, not a separate scheme, but a documented record of how the scheme had evolved. Forged Zelle receipts, some matching formats already in the indictment and some newer. 3 sets of photocopied driver's licenses. Victim initials appearing alongside dates and dollar amounts. And a section the case agent described in a subsequent affidavit as a handwritten timeline, a sequence of notations following the same structural pattern as the fraud charges in the original indictment, almost exactly. The ledger appeared to be Aldrin's own record of the operation. A working document. Henriksen spent the first hour cataloging the ledger's sections. The first 32 pages covered what she recognized as the original scheme, the entries matching, in structure, and in approximate dollar amounts, the fraud charges already in the indictment. The dollar figures were not identical. Aldrin had recorded them differently, using a notation system that took 20 minutes to decode. Once decoded, the figures matched to within rounding of the indictment's numbers. The next 11 pages were different. A financial schedule, with dates running from the previous spring through the following spring. Projected returns. Names in abbreviated form. A column of figures that did not correspond to any documented transaction in the existing case file. These pages appeared to represent a planned expansion of the scheme, targets identified, amounts projected, a timeline for approach. Several names had check marks. Several had question marks. Henriksen flagged every one. Pages 44 through 58 contained entries she later described as the most significant. Each carried a letter designation, A, B, C, with a date and a dollar figure beside it. The letter designations matched the initials of the 3 women recovered from the cellar. The earliest entry was dated 6 months before Aldrin's original indictment. The most recent was dated November 27th, the day before she missed her first check-in. The November 27th entry, beside the letter C, read, "Final arrangement, transfer complete." Henriksen stopped at that notation for a long time. She later told the U.S. Attorney's Office that she read it 3 times before she understood what she was reading. Final arrangement. Transfer complete. The language was Aldrin's own euphemism for whatever transition had occurred between the financial fraud phase and the root cellar. The entry suggested that as late as November 27th, the day before Aldrin walked away from her bail conditions, she had maintained her own record of the operation. She had sat somewhere and written those words into a leather-bound log that she then concealed in a cookbook. The compulsion to document, even at the end, was something Henriksen noted in her affidavit. White-collar fraud like this rarely stays financial. When a scheme is built on forgery and false documentation, the perpetrator has already decided that other people's belief systems are raw material. The leap from financial manipulation to physical control is not as large as it should be. The ledger suggests Aldrin had been running these 2 tracks in parallel. The fraud generated the contact and leverage. The leverage generated the captivity. The captivity extended the leverage. That structure, financial crime as a pipeline into something more serious, is what took 3 young women off the streets of 3 different states for 95 days. The question case agents were still working at the time this account was prepared was how many other names were in the ledger who had not come forward. Federally, Aldrin faced the original indictment counts, wire fraud, forgery, and money laundering, and the new charges stemming from the December 9th discovery, which agents and prosecutors were describing in internal communications as a significant expansion of the case. The logistics of the root cellar, the padlocked external hatch, the battery-powered light on a timer, the expired provisions, the iron rail, all of it documented and catalogued. The case manifesto was sealed for 5 years by order of the presiding judge in the District of Utah. 3 deputy marshals and 1 property manager were the only non-institutional parties who knew the cabin address before the breach. The sealing order covered the precise addresses, the names of the 3 recovered women, and specific financial figures from the ledger. What was not sealed was the fact of the discovery, the existence of the false pantry, or Aldrin's custody status. She was arraigned on December 11th, 2025. The original bail was revoked. She was held without bond pending a detention hearing. The fraud charges carried a maximum of 20 years per count under federal statute. The additional charges being developed by prosecutors in the weeks following the discovery carried their own weight, which would be specified when the superseding indictment was filed. That superseding indictment had not been filed publicly at the time this reconstruction was completed. There is a detail in the evidence inventory from the cabin that stays with you. The cookbook that concealed the ledger. It was a popular regional title, the kind sold at Utah gift shops and ski lodges. Spine facing out, title visible. Sitting between 2 other cookbooks of similar height on an open kitchen shelf. No one searching that kitchen casually would have pulled it down. It would have required a thorough search, which is exactly what you don't conduct when you believe you're picking up a bail fugitive from a vacation property. Aldrin had built contingencies into every layer of this. The false wall looked like decorative design. The cellar predated her, so she hadn't built it. The ledger was hidden in plain sight. The provisions were controlled to a schedule. The external hatch was padlocked from outside, which meant at some point she had exited and re-entered through the interior. She had managed this alone. You have to ask, how many times did she go back down those 6 steps, make sure the panel was latched, and go upstairs to sleep? The answer, based on the 95-day timeline, was countless times. On paper, the fraud scheme had been sophisticated enough to survive an original indictment and a bail arrangement. In practice, it collapsed because of a property manager driving a ridge road at 3:41 in the morning, thin gray smoke, and a Belgian Malinois that declined to move from a wall. What no one inside the operation could have anticipated was that Dale Whitford drove his overnight property checks personally. He had done so for 11 years. He knew which properties were winterized. He knew what smoke from a cold chimney looked like versus smoke from a chimney burning for hours. He knew this one had been burning for hours. At the hospital, the case agent assigned to the victims noted in her intake summary that the youngest of the 3, the 24-year-old from Nevada, had asked the first question when the pantry wall came in. She had asked what day it was. December 9th, 2025. She had been counting. That detail, a young woman in a sealed root cellar below a mountain cabin in the Wasatch foothills, tracking time in the dark, is the one that doesn't leave the case file cleanly. 95 days is a number that requires marking. You track it by some method because losing it means losing the thread that connects you to what came before. She had found a method. She had held on to it through 95 mornings in a 52-degree room lit by a single battery-powered work light. The investigative record is precise and procedural. Pages have been cataloged and photographed. Evidence has been logged, numbered, and stored. Charges have been drafted. The system processes. What the system does not process is the 95 mornings that young woman counted, alone. The investigative machinery, the task force, The bail conditions, the pre-trial supervision, did not find Aldrin. A civilian found her. He drove a road he had no federal obligation to drive, noticed something outside his immediate responsibility, and made a phone call. The federal apparatus responded correctly and quickly once the call came. The K-9 work was precise. The tactical execution was clean. The search was thorough. But 11 days of professional fugitive investigation had produced nothing. The property manager produced a breakthrough in 20 minutes. The system that should have prevented 95 days did not. The bail conditions, the financial disclosure requirements, the pre-trial supervision, all of it was technically satisfied by Aldrin until the moment she chose to leave. The 3 young women had been in that cellar for more than 2 months before anyone had a federal warrant. The warrant came too late to be preventive. It was reactive. And what made it effective, ultimately, was not the warrant itself,